Hello and welcome everyone to another DDi CADcast. My name is Cody Armstrong and the topic is Customizing CAMWorks Post Processors Part 2. Thank you for joining. My name is Cody Armstrong, and like I mentioned, today we're going over Part 2 of Customizing CAMWorks Post Processors. So this is going to be a continuation of what we've already done in Part 1, right, the initial CADcast on Customizing CAMWorks Post Processors. And so it's important to realize that I'm assuming you've already watched the Part 1 of the Customizing CAMWorks Post Processors, and we're really going to build on top of that with this Part 2. So first off, I want to get into what we covered in the first part of the CADcast. So the first part was basics of Universal Post Generator, right, the UPG, how to build a real basic post using the UPG, and how to compile it. And we went into some basics of compiling as well. And then in the end of the CADcast, I got into intro to EC Editor, the text editor that's really friendly to customizing CAMWorks Post Processors, how to manipulate it, and then also how to compile post that you've modified in the EC Editor. So again, I want to stress that anything I'm doing today, I'm assuming you've already watched the first CADcast, and then we're going to build on top of that with Part 2. So the way I like to structure this is kind of a questions and answers style session. I get a lot of questions on how do I do this, how do I do that in the CAMWorks Post Processors, and so what I've done is kind of cherry pick the more popular questions that I get, the questions I get more often, and try and isolate those and answer those in a CADcast. So without further ado, let's jump right into question 1. How do I change the default extension when I'm posting code? And what I mean by this is when you typically post code, it could be .nc, it could be txt, it could be .t. There's all kinds of different extensions. A lot of this depends on the type of machine you're using. Well, how can I make an extension that works for my machine, the default setting in CAMWorks? And the short answer is to create a pin file and edit it to modify the default file extension. Right? But now what I want to do is I want to jump into the software and show you how this is done. So we'll start with the software, and here I have a real basic part. Again, for the simplicity of the post processor topic, I'm not going to get into really complicated parts. It really doesn't help in terms of showing you post processor things. But so I have a real basic part, and I've generated just a couple of toolpaths here, and I'm going to go about showing you what I mean by changing the default file extension when you're posting code. So here I have some toolpath generated, and now I'm ready to post code. Right? So I hit post process, and here's the option I'm referring to. When you save code out of CAMWorks, you have a series of different file extensions that you can save it as, and it defaults to txt, but it could be nc, cnc. You see all the different types, and there are even more than this depending on the type of machine that you have. So what I want to go over is how you can establish what the default setting is for this when you go about posting code, so that you're not constantly changing the extension as you post code out of CAMWorks. So let's get into that. Now I mentioned the short answer is to create a PIM file. And a PIM file is just a file that it gives the default file extension for posted code. And I found the easiest way to do this is to take a PIM file from the default posts that come with CAMWorks and just copy it to match my post, right? So the default posts in CAMWorks in our folder called C CAMWorks Data, whatever version of CAMWorks you're using, this is 2013 in my case, under a folder called posts. So I have this folder called posts, and it has a whole series of default posts that the software comes with. And you'll see there are .pinf file, P-I-N-F, in this folder, M3-axis PIM file, to go with the M3-axis tutorial CTL file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the PIMF file. Now I also have to take the tutorial RTF file, rich text format files, both the _L and the _S. I'm going to explain this in just a moment, but I'm just going to take both of these files, or all three of them, and copy them. All right, so I'm going to right click and copy. Then I want to browse to where I put my post file. Right, so I put my post file in the folder called C posts. You'll see it here, the Haas post file set. Right, and here's all the files associated with my Haas post. I'm going to go ahead and paste those files into that folder. Now it's important that they all be the name of the post, in my case Haas. So I'm going to rename all of these files to Haas. Right? And I'm renaming the PINF file as well as the RTF files. Okay? I'm going to add an _s to denote the short versus longhand RTF files. So now I have all these files. They're all the same name as my original post, right, Haas. And so now I can go about modifying them. So the first thing I'm going to do is edit the PINF file. And I'm just going to right click. You can open this with Notepad. Mine's already set to open it with Notepad, but if yours isn't, when it gives you a prompt, just open it with Notepad. And you'll see this is the file here. Very short file, just says post info. Right? Post name, I'm going to change this to Haas. Post extension, I'm going to change from txt to nc. And that's the primary function there. I want to change that to something that matches what my machine takes. So whatever it is, if it's cnc.t.nc, this is where you change the extension. And then we have the short and long info text files. And these are really just text files, information files associated with your machine. I'm just going to change the name to Haas S, and I left this just as Haas. Okay? But again, it's just a reference back to your short and long info files, RTF files that I was mentioning that we copied over to that folder. And that's really the only modification you have to make. I save this and close it. And again, the important thing is they're named the same, they're in the same folder, and now if I go to post code, right, post process, notice the default is now .nc. Right? So this is how I'd go about changing the default file extension for posted code coming out of CAMWorks. So coming back to my PowerPoint, I want to move on to the next question. And so a common question I frequently get is, how do I change the default coolant command? And really this could be any M command or G command in the software, but how do I change it to something besides M08 as an example? Let's say hypothetically that my machine takes like an M58 for coolant on command. I want to be able to change that in my post processor. And again, I mentioned this could be any numbered command that associated with an M or G in the post. I'm going to show you what I mean by that in just a minute. But the short answer to this is you're going to change the number in a section of the post called calc init M codes. So let's jump into how to accomplish this. So again, my goal for this, jumping back to the software, is to change the default number associated with my coolant command. In my case, it's M08. Yours could be different, but let's just say I want to change it from M08 to M58 as an example. And this could be really any number of different commands. As we get into the post, I'm going to point that out. But for my example, I'm going to stick with I have an M08 in my default post. I need to change it to an M58 to turn my coolant on. So first I want to show you what I mean by this. I have my same sample part up here with two toolpaths already assigned. I'm going to go ahead and post code, and we'll just post it to the desktop. And I'll run through the code. And we'll jump over real quickly here and take a look at it. So here's the test file that was just created. And you'll see as I jump through the code here, the M08 turning on the coolant in the tool changer, or the height offset line, I should say. Right? So here's my height offset coming down to Z1, and then I have my coolant coming on. And here's the situation where I want to change this from an M08 to turn the coolant on to an M58. Okay, that's my example in this scenario. But it could be any number of different commands that you want to change in your default post. So let's close this out. I'm going to jump back into the software, and what I want to do is customize the post processor. And the example I'm going to use here, I'm going to call up in the EC editor. And I mentioned the EC editor in the first Customizing CAMWorks Post Processor CADcast, so I suggest you watch that if you haven't already. So I'm going to go ahead and open up and make my modifications. So I'm going to open up the source file for this Haas post. Right? The source file is where this section is located. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up. And here we have the source file with all the different commands and sections in it. And at the very bottom of the sections, I'm going to expand out sections. At the very bottom down here, there's section init M codes and G codes. I'm going to expand this out. And you'll see here at the very bottom, calc init G codes, calc init M codes. And this is where the integers are established, the numbers are established for the different G and M codes. So you can really quickly kind of figure out just by the way it's laid out what these things do. G rapid is G0, right? G line is G1. G cutter comp off is G40. So you can kind of go through and figure out what these different things mean. And this also makes it very easy to tweak the default settings. So if I scroll down here, you'll find M coolant flood, right? This line here. And it's set to 8. So to change this, I can change this to any number I want just by changing this number. Okay? So it's set to M08. I'm going to type in 58. Right? And then save my source file. Now, of course, before any changes can be seen in the finished code, I have to recompile. Right? So I'm going to go ahead and call up the UPG, and we will compile this post processor. So I'm going to go to File, Compile Source, and again I covered this in the first part. I'm going to select my source file, hit Compile. It says it compiled successfully, and now I can see the changes when I go to post code again in CAMWorks. So I'm going to hit OK to this. We'll bring up CAMWorks, right? Bring up SolidWorks again, and I'm going to go ahead and select my post. Right? So I'm going to browse to the Haas CTL, open, and select. Then again, I'm going to hit Post Process. Okay. We'll go ahead and save this as test 1. And I'll hit Save. And again, we will post code. Go ahead and hit OK, and then we'll just tab over and take a real quick look at the new test 1 and C file. Okay. Now if I scroll down, you'll see in that same height offset line an M58 instead of my M8. So that's how I go about making modifications to the numbers associated with either the G or M commands in your particular post processor. So back to my PowerPoint, let's move on to the next question. How would I go about adding a tool list to the top of my posted code? It's a very commonly asked question. How do I go about adding a list of the tools at the very top of the code so that the programmer, whoever's setting this up, knows which tools to have, what order they're in, and so on? And so the short answer to this is I'm going to insert a one-line command into a section called calc start of tape. So let's jump into how I might accomplish this. So adding the tool list to the top of your code is actually a really simple thing to do in the post processor. But first I want to show you what I mean by adding a tool list. So when I go to post code, right, I have my same part up. I'm going to go ahead and post code, and we'll just save it to the desktop. And I'll go ahead and hit post. At the very bottom of posted code in CAMWorks, in this post-process output, you can see the tool number, the size, and a little bit of description for the tools that you'll be using. This is what they call the .set file. So if you're familiar with the .set file that's created with the posted code every time you post code in CAMWorks, this is essentially what it has. It has details about the machine, but then it lists each tool and details about that tool in order that it's used. And so basically what I want to do is I want to take this tool list that we have here that's now showing up in the .set file. I want to put it at the top of my code. So opening up that code real quickly here, here's my test.nc file. And what I want to do is at the top here, I want to add a tool list showing every tool, the tool number, and a description, diameter, so on. So that's the goal. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. To make this modification, we need to modify the file in the EC editor. And we're actually going to modify the .lib file, right? Not the source file. Right? The source file is where a lot of the modifications are made, but in this case, the .lib file, the library file, is the one we're going to be modifying. And in the .lib file, there's a section called calc start of tape. And all we have to do is add one single line to this calc start of tape to get it to push all the tools to the top of that posted code. So in the calc start of tape, if I double click here, you'll see calc start of tape, and at the very bottom there's a section output start of tape. And what I'm going to do is just add a real simple command, :c:, get tools, parenthesis 2, system, close parenthesis. And that's it. Adding that one line will add the list of tools to the top of code every time I post code in CAMWorks. So of course now I need to save, and before I can see any changes in the finished code in CAMWorks, I need to compile. So again, I'm going to go back to the UPG. We will compile source. I'll select my source file, compile, compiled successfully, and now I can test it out in CAMWorks. So going back, of course, I need to select my post processor. Right? I'm going to select the Haas CTL, and again I'll just post process. And now if I open that file up, you'll notice at the very top of my NC file a list of each tool. So tool 9 is my first tool. It's an end mill 3/4 inch with all these details, right? 4 flute, 1 inch length of cut, so on. So it gives me a breakdown of each tool, the diameter, and a description of that tool. So that's how I'd go about adding a tool list to the top of all my posted code in CAMWorks. Alright, so moving on to my next question. How do I go about eliminating the 0 after G commands? So example, I want G1 instead of G01, or I want G2 instead of G02. And the simple answer to this is we're going to add a left spaces equal 1 line to the G attribute in the library file. So let's get into how to accomplish this. So eliminating the 0 in G01 or G02 or G03 is actually another really simple thing to accomplish in the post processor. But first I want to explain exactly what we're talking about. So again, I'm back to my same part, same file set, same tool path. I'm going to go ahead and post again, create some code, and again we'll take a glance at it and see what I'm referring to. So when I open this up, your common code typically has a G01 for a straight line move, or a G03 for a radius move. And so you have that G0 whatever it is, 1, 2, or 3 in the standard code, at least that most machines take. But you do have those that prefer to see just a G1, G2, G3. Right? And there are even some machines that require it to be formatted that way. So what I want to do is show you how to do this in a simple fashion in the post processor. So let's go ahead and close this out. And again, I'm going to open up my post in the EC editor. And this modification is going to be in the library file. So again, I'm back in the Haas.lib file. And under attributes, we have an attribute name of G. And of course, G is just how we define the G attribute in our post. And you'll see a lot of different ways of defining it. So it says, you know, here's the things that are before the G command. Here's how many write places you're going to have. It cannot be a decimal, so on. So you can see just by the formatting of this attribute kind of the things that are associated with it and how it's controlled. But what you can also do is add more lines to it. So in my case, what I want to do is just before right places equals 0 and after word address before, I'm going to add a line, colon, left places equal 1. So again, colon, left places equal 1 forces it to only have one place to the left. It's eliminating that 0. It's a simple way of getting rid of the 0 in your G commands. Right? So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And of course, before I can see any changes in the finished code, I have to recompile. So I saved it. I'm going to go back to the UPG. Same things we've done before. File, compile source. I'll select my source file and compile. Okay. Now if I want to see the change in CAMWorks, I'm going to go ahead and post code again. So I'll call up my part. Again, I have to select my post. That's an important step after each modification that you make. After you recompile, you have to reselect your post. And now I can post code. I'll hit OK, and now we'll jump over to the desktop and take a look at that code. Now what you'll notice is now I have G0 instead of G00, or I have G1 instead of G01, G3 instead of G03. So that's really what I've accomplished just by adding that one line of left places equal 1. Okay, and again, I added that to the library file, so that's an important step to note. I wasn't in the source file in that case, I was in the library file, and I added just that single line to the G attribute. So that's how I'd go about accomplishing that. So that's it for this particular CADcast. Please don't hesitate to visit us at www.DDiCAD.com.